Today on Notsam Wrestling, the WWE Draft has commenced. What to make of Dominic Mysterio and Liv Morgan, Becky Lynch's champion, and what went on with that Tony Khan angle. This is Notsam Wrestling. Welcome once again to Notsam Wrestling. Hopefully this isn't your first time here. What a week. It always is a week, isn't it? That's why we do this every single week, and there's been so much that's happened in between the last time we spoke. Of course, just over the weekend, the SmackDown Lowdown, hosted by yours truly, came out of the Notsam studio, the same location that we are meeting in here today, was and still is available on Peacock, coming right after the draft. But before we get to the draft, before we get to any of that stuff, let's get to what happened on Monday Night Raw last week. First, with Rhea Ripley gone. So this is something that we encountered, obviously, WrestleMania season, right? That you heard about all these injuries, and that was part of the story that went into the ever-changing main event scene of WrestleMania 40, when it was like, okay, I think this is the direction. Okay, that's going to be the direction. And then this guy gets injured, and the whole card changes 60 days before it's supposed to go on, and the story gets told that way. I think the same thing is going on right now with Rhea Ripley. Clearly, I say clearly because it seems obvious to me, but I believe anyway, naive as it may be, that there was an obvious plan for Rhea Ripley coming right out of WrestleMania. That the build to WrestleMania, and you could see the seeds being planted going towards WrestleMania, but ultimately that was that sort of crowning moment. WrestleMania was that moment that would leave no questions to be asked about the run that Rhea Ripley has been on, and whether or not she was the top dog in the women's division. Now, coming off of WrestleMania, it goes, okay, well, where are we next? What's the next step? And I think Liv Morgan had everything to do with that. Obviously, that all gets changed when there's one physical interaction between Rhea Ripley and Liv Morgan, and like that, Rhea Ripley's on the shelf for however long, and the Women's World Championship is vacated. Battle Royal held on Monday Night Raw to figure out who the women's champion is. Now, we'll get into who was named women's champion. Very interesting that instead of going like, okay, there'll be a tournament, okay, they wanted to crown a new women's champion immediately. 1 week. Rhea puts the title down. 1 week later, we've got a new champion, and we're still moving forward. I think that's key to kind of what's going on here. I also think it's very interesting that if you look at the two draft pools that we saw on SmackDown and on Raw, Rhea Ripley's not in the draft pool. Rhea Ripley is not out. There's no mention of Rhea Ripley. It's the Judgment Day, but it's Dom, Finn Balor, and JD McDonough. Now, this year, they decided that champions were not eligible for the draft. So that way, there'd be no confusion. The WWE champions, the WWE Women's Champion, World Champion, Tag Team Champions, and the United States Champion all stay on SmackDown. The World Heavyweight, the World Women's, the World Tag, and the Intercontinental all stay on Raw. So Damian Priest, obviously not eligible for the draft, but Rhea Ripley is not in that draft pool either. And you might say, well, she's injured. She's out. But so is CM Punk. So is Seth Rollins. Roman Reigns is nowhere to be found. The only kind of active members of the roster that are not, injury or not, eligible for the draft that really I noticed was Rhea Ripley and Jimmy Uso. And I think that the Jimmy Uso thing is part of the story where it's we don't know where he stands, right? The Bloodline, it was made clear that the Bloodline was Roman Reigns, Tama Tonga, and Solo Sikoa, which I think is important for a storyline beat because it's like the Bloodline is not just Solo and Tama. Roman Reigns is still 100%. So there is this thing where, from the perspective of those two characters, Solo and Tama, they're expecting Roman Reigns to be with them when Roman is back. Now, that brings even more question as to when the MFT Tama Tonga, which I loved all the theories, by the way, coming off of last week's podcast about what MFT stood for. But the MFT Tama Tonga, said by orders of the tribal chief after he took out Jimmy Uso. If Solo and Tama are still assuming that Roman Reigns is a part of the bloodline, who's the tribal chief? Is it Solo Sikoa, who is staking claim? The way I read it, I think that Solo Sikoa considers himself tribal chief, but at the same time, if they're expecting Roman Reigns to eventually return and be a part of the bloodline, wouldn't he still be the tribal chief? And then there are still others that think that The Rock, the final boss, is behind the scenes calling the shots. I think ultimately Solo will be revealed as the one who called that shot. When Roman comes back, there will be questions. I think maybe Solo thinks that Roman's going to kind of fall in line, and Roman does not, and that's where the turn comes in. And eventually, do I think that The Rock will reveal himself as somebody who supports Solo's plan? Yes. Do I think The Rock will reveal himself as the one who's been pulling the puppet strings the entire time behind Solo Sikoa? No. I think that that's a fine line, and I could be wrong. That's just the way I'm reading it. But I feel like this is all about Solo taking ownership, and that's why it's even more important to note down that Roman Reigns, at the top of the show, voluntarily withdrew from the draft. Paul Heyman makes that announcement where he makes it seem like Roman is doing something outside of himself, almost charitable, where he goes, Roman Reigns, who knows when Roman's going to be back, but you couldn't do this draft and not have Roman Reigns be the number one overall pick. So Roman has decided to take himself out and allow somebody else to make history. And that ends up being Bianca Belair. And ironically, for Monday Night Raw, that ends up being Jey Uso. Now, we'll talk about the draft picks and everything else in a little bit. But I do think that it's a good thing that the draft is being kind of brought in to this whole bloodline story and where everything goes. And the fact that Solo would be pissed that Roman's gone, Solo's trying to stake his claim. Tama Tonga gets brought in, and all of a sudden, a month after WrestleMania, when Roman Reigns is the top dog in the company, they're getting drafted in the third round, and not even first pick in the third round. I don't think we're done with that story at all. Also, I see we've got the Bloodline versus Kevin Owens and the Bloodline versus Kevin Owens and Randy Orton at Backlash. Is this where another member of the Bloodline comes out? I think very possibly, right? All these rumors of Jacob Fatu are just lingering everywhere. Is that where we see him? I hope so. It would be very, very exciting. And while there hasn't been any clarification, I do want to go back to last week because a lot of people interpreted the Kevin Owens beatdown as that was because Kevin Owens kind of shooed them away from the private locker room that used to be owned by the Bloodline that is now owned by Cody Rhodes. And that's possible. I mean, I thought that was a little bit petty of the Bloodline, if that's what this whole thing is based upon. But maybe this version of the Bloodline is very petty. We'll see. But that was, I guess, I didn't realize we were going to go there. That was this week's As Our Bloodline Turns. But going back to Monday Night Raw. So the story that let's go to Becky Lynch. Becky Lynch wins the women's championship, and I think because I was kind of expecting Liv Morgan to win the women's championship, if I'm being honest. Yeah, when I saw that battle royal happen, now I thought that when we talk about the production of the show, it's been so cool the way they've been, and we've talked about this, trying all these new things, the way they had Becky Lynch back there kind of narrating what was going on, almost an on-the-scene reporter narrating all the goings-on of the backstage environment as all these storylines are playing themselves out. And I love when they do stuff like that, when they have the stories aren't happening inside a vacuum, that everything is in some way, shape, or form intertwined, that we're reminded that all these stories that are playing themselves out on television are all existing in the same locker room, so that when we go backstage, Maxine over here, she's going to be concerned about this. Nia Jax over here, she's going to have this attitude. So-and-so and so-and-so. I think that it adds a level of importance to the stories because it means that you can think about them, that there is this life that's happening, behind the scenes, that we can start to talk about the motivations of these characters, because when we do get a glimpse behind the curtain, those characters are still existing. Maybe I'm thinking about this too deeply. I don't know, but I would imagine by now that's why you're here, right? So, Becky ends up winning the championship. And the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I think this might be how do we get as close to the story that we were going to tell with Rhea Ripley as we can without actually telling the story with Rhea Ripley? I feel like the era of, plans changed, so now we just have to, for instance, a couple of years ago, Roman Reigns was supposed to be in the main event of day one against Brock Lesnar, and it couldn't happen, right? Roman Reigns was sick, whatever it was. So in a snap, the decision is made for not only Brock Lesnar to still wrestle at the pay-per-view, but now he's going to be in the WWE Championship match instead of the match with Roman Reigns. And not only is he going to be in that, but he's going to win the WWE Championship, taking it off Big E. Now, there's no way that decision could have been made weeks in advance, right? It couldn't have happened, because the plan was always to do Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar. But it's just like, okay, well, if we can't have that big match, let's just have something massive happen, and we'll figure it out later. I feel like when I watch the show now, the era of let's just have something massive happen and we'll figure it out later is not really the era that we're in anymore. The Triple H era is more about, okay, looking at the pieces that you have in front of you and trying to figure out narratively how to make the most sense with them. I think Triple H likes to tell stories long-term, right? And likes to have a semblance of logic. And I think that semblance and string of logic through the stories that we've been hearing is what it adds some cohesion, right? It makes it so that the shows feel cohesive and you don't just feel kind of lost watching. If you're trying to convince people to watch these shows week in, week out, the last thing you want is for them to watch these shows week in, week out, and then feel lost as they're watching. It's like, what am I investing in? So I that's all to say that the more I thought about it, the more I said, okay, well, what's the logic in having Becky Lynch win the women's championship, other than the fact that it's like Becky Lynch is the biggest star on the roster, right? Because that's the surface level. Okay, let's just say if we were positioning Rhea Ripley as the biggest star on the roster, and she is not the champion anymore, who do we put the title on? The other biggest star on the roster. And it may be as simple as that. It could be. But I don't think it is. Right? Because I think that the story that they were building was this story of Liv Morgan chasing that championship. That the next however many months, say, were allotted to Liv Morgan chases the championship, and that will get us to X. Whether that's SummerSlam, whether that's Money in the Bank, whatever. I feel there's a part of me that goes, well, what if, because Liv Morgan got drafted to Raw, what if the idea is that we wanted Liv Morgan to chase? If we just put the title on Liv Morgan right now, then we're basically just skipping 3 months or whatever it is of story. And now we have nothing. Now we have to figure it out as we go. We just, boom, here you go, hit the shot, boom, now let's figure it out. Instead, what if we still kept going with this plan we have for Liv Morgan, but just tweaked it a little bit? And instead of having her chase Rhea Ripley, have her chase Becky Lynch. I told you coming out of WrestleMania that Rhea Ripley was going to be babyface confirmed. You know, the most popular athlete in the women's division. And I think they go, okay, well, if the plan was for for Liv Morgan to chase a massive babyface who has the title on this revenge tour, where are we going to go now? I guess Becky Lynch will be the one that Liv Morgan chases as this heel. Then I start thinking, well, how do you make Liv Morgan a heel? If you're going to have Liv Morgan chasing Becky Lynch or Rhea Ripley for that matter. She has to be a villain, right? How do you make Liv Morgan a villain? Liv Morgan might be the most relatable woman in the entire women's division. Little kids love Liv Morgan. There's just something about Liv Morgan, something about that story, something about the way she communicates where it feels real life. You get the sense of a human being that's had to work hard for every single spot that she's gotten. The sense that this is a woman who has only been put in the positions that she's been in because she's proven that she's capable of it. And even when she has proven that she's capable of it, every opportunity has been well, let's see how this goes. Not okay, we're off to the races. So how do you make that into a villain? I think that it started by having her, instead of have any sort of being sorry that she injured Rhea Ripley, the fact that she took credit for it. The fact that she instantly was like, oh, I'm really happy that you're injured. I'm really glad that I did that. And it's not a bad play, right? It's right out of the Drew McIntyre playbook. When Drew McIntyre said that he prayed that this would happen to CM Punk and his prayers were answered, it was like, okay, now we're off to the races. This is what we've been looking for. We were all sold on Drew McIntyre as a villain. Liv Morgan going, yeah, this is what I wanted. I'm not sorry at all that this happened. I'm very glad that this happened. And I hope that even more terrible things happen to you. That's a start. But with Liv, there's still, I think, more that needs to be done to really make her a villain. And then I'm watching Raw, and I see Liv Morgan and Dominic Mysterio go face to face. And at first glance, I go, oh, yeah, okay, there's tension here. Because, that's Mommy. Liv Morgan took out Mommy. Obviously, Dominic is going to have a problem with this, right? But then they just stared. And Dominic, looking all cool, he's decided to go full just mustache, which is just such a great look for him. Mullet, mustache. He's got his arm in a sling. Apparently, Dominic, of all people, is getting Tommy John surgery. That's the rumor. Although, then Dominic tweeted out he wasn't getting surgery. These are just dirt sheet rumors. He didn't say dirt sheet, but he said he had avoided surgery. Either way, his arm was in a sling. So, obviously, Dominic is out. We don't know how long he's going to be injured for, but Dominic Mysterio is in this great spot in the WWE where if he doesn't wrestle, that's okay. His presence is a present. It's enough that he's there holding a microphone, being by the side of the Judgment Day. If you have Finn Balor and JD McDonough doing the lion's share of the physicality, and Dominic Mysterio just at ringside with a mustache, a cowhide vest, and an arm sling with those alpaca boots or whatever it is that he's wearing, you're still money, baby. You're still good to go. Dominic Mysterio could be one of the first people since Stone Cold Steve Austin to get more over while he's injured. When Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1997 went out with a broken neck, he couldn't wrestle. So what did he do? He showed up to TV every week in an Austin 316 t-shirt and blue jeans, and he started stunning officials. He stunned Sergeant Slaughter. He stunned good old JR. And this build was built until he stunned the chairman of the board himself, Vincent Kennedy McMahon. And it made it so that when he finally got back in the ring, he was bigger than ever. I'm not saying Dominic is the modern day Stone Cold Steve Austin, but I'm not saying he's not. Okay. Maybe there's some favoritism being shown there, but regardless, the stare was all I needed because my mind starts going crazy. And this has been brought up other places than right here, but this is where I'd like to see it go. You really want to make Liv Morgan a villain. Show me how hellbent she is on revenge. Is she done? Is she done with Mommy? Was it enough? Because she never beat Rhea Ripley. She didn't take the title from Rhea Ripley. As a matter of fact, she's not even holding Rhea Ripley's title right now. Becky Lynch is. She injured Rhea Ripley. She went eye for an eye on her, right? She's taken however many months off of Rhea Ripley's career, the way she said Rhea Ripley did to her. She's made it so that Rhea Ripley is no longer the WWE Women's World Champion. But she said she was going to take everything from Rhea Ripley. She said she was on a revenge tour. I want to see Liv Morgan take Dominic Mysterio away from Rhea Ripley. I want to see Rhea Ripley off television, away from the locker room. Dominic Mysterio is on the road. He gets booed everywhere he goes by these fans. He needs positive reinforcement. Dominic Mysterio needs support. Mommy was always there. Everything Dominic ever did, Rhea Ripley was supportive of. Rhea Ripley put an R&D, not for research and development, but for Rhea and Dom under her eye socket so that everybody knew where her loyalty lied. That person, that influence, is no longer on Monday Night Raw. And moreover, Damian Priest, as the world heavyweight champion, is more looking for success from the Judgment Day than ever before. He has zero tolerance for things not going perfectly. So where is Dominic going to get that positive reinforcement from? Well, Liv Morgan's been watching it. Matter of fact, Liv Morgan's had nothing but time on her hands while she was at home injured. What if Liv Morgan starts putting the moves a little bit on old Dominic Mysterio? What if Dominic Mysterio, whose character has been questioned by some on WWE television, what if he's not able to fend off the advances? What if he succumbs to the advances of Liv Morgan? And a few weeks from now, we start seeing Liv and Dominic working together, and that work becomes a friendship, and that friendship becomes more to the point that Dominic and Liv Morgan are an item. And we don't even, mention Mommy. Well, the commentary does and everything, but it's not like Dominic makes this announcement that he's left Rhea Ripley. This is just what Dominic is doing while Mommy's not home. Except then Mommy comes home. See, this to me is where it gets great. Because once Mommy is back, Liv Morgan is in serious trouble, and any sympathy that she had from the fan base is out the window. I think you could have Liv and Dominic build this relationship. By the time you get to, maybe June, July, maybe at Money in the Bank, you have Liv Morgan beat Becky Lynch for the Women's World Championship with the help of Dominic Mysterio. See, now it makes sense that Liv Morgan didn't win the Battle Royal, right? Because if Liv Morgan wins the title that Rhea Ripley had to give up with the help of Rhea Ripley's baby, if it's her mommy baby, Dominic Mysterio, come on. Now Rhea has nothing to say to Dominic Mysterio. So when Rhea Ripley comes back and she sees Liv Morgan with her title and with her man, and knows that her man was so disloyal that he actually is the one that made sure that Liv Morgan, Rhea Ripley's arch nemesis, the woman who put her on the shelf, is the champion, now there's going to be hell to pay. And how do we make sure that that hell is paid? Well, of course, via a ladder match. Whatever month Rhea Ripley comes back, whether it's in time for SummerSlam, whether it's Bash in Berlin, whether it's whatever's going on in September, October, I don't care if it's Survivor Series. You get a ladder out and you put that women's championship on top of the ceiling. But with that women's championship, you had custody of Dominic Mysterio. Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley have a ladder match for Dominic's custody. And that custody paper is attached to the women's championship because Rhea Ripley wins this ladder match. And she gets custody. And Dominic goes in for the reunion, right? And they hug. And then Rhea Ripley kicks him with the low blow. Dominic goes down. She throws the paper down on him. And Rhea Ripley is victoriously holding the women's championship above Dominic Mysterio. And now Rhea Ripley is off to the races as a solo babyface queen. And Dominic Mysterio has to figure out what's next. Because Liv doesn't stay with Dominic after that. Liv was just using Dominic anyway. Liv is going to figure out another path here. Maybe she's not done with Rhea Ripley, maybe whatever, but she has no interest in Dominic Mysterio anymore. So Dominic has now lost Rhea and Liv Morgan. Maybe he goes back to Judgment Day, and Judgment Day is like, what do you want from us? And Dominic has to figure out what's next. I don't know. Maybe Dominic goes with Tiffany Stratton after that. I don't know what happens next. But that at least takes us through Mommy's return. I would love to see it. We did see the draft happen this week. And especially on SmackDown, not a lot of roster changes. The headlines for the draft, in terms of the big players, if you watched, I did my fantasy draft this year on the bump. A lot of times I've done the draft here on the podcast, but this year I did it on the bump. And I had a lot of changes, right? I had Seth Rollins coming to SmackDown. I had Jey Uso coming to SmackDown. I had AJ Styles and LA Knight going to Raw. I had some real shakeups. In terms of the main roster, not a ton of shakeups, right? On SmackDown, you had Nia Jax going over to SmackDown. I guess Andrade went over to SmackDown, but really Andrade was never a declared superstar in either roster, I don't think. I guess, and hopefully more will be made of the Braun Breaker moving over to Raw, because I just think it's so funny that for weeks we saw Nick Aldis courting Braun Breaker. For weeks we saw him, he was taking him up to a luxury box. He was arguing with Adam Pearce. He was offering him this lucrative contract. And then a month after Braun Breaker officially signs to SmackDown, Adam Pearce just scoops him right up. Why would you sign somebody to your roster if the draft is in a month? Just grab him in the draft. So I hope that Adam Pearce takes a victory lap over the fact that is a pretty terrific steal. But I think the two big call-ups to SmackDown anyway were not call-ups on SmackDown. Kiana James getting called up to Raw. And I've talked about her on the podcast before. Kiana James is an absolute get. I think it's so great that she's getting called up. I think that it is such good evidence of what is going on down there in the PC. Now, I think that Kiana James is not one of these call-ups that immediately goes for the women's championship. I think that she's going to have to spend some time establishing herself. But I watched Kiana James go. If you just watch her just from premium live event to premium live event in NXT, it is amazing what she's done. And to me, I think that is the most impressive part of so many people that are in the Performance Center is the improvement. I look at the improvement of people more than even the sort of basic skill set. Because the basic skill set is the basic skill set, is always going to be the basic skill set. But when you watch somebody steadily improve and assume that trajectory is going to continue, there's no reason why they're going to improve, stop, done, finished, okay, now we're good. If they can continue to improve on that level, we're off to the races. I'm joking around about Dominic Mysterio, but when you look, and Dominic Mysterio was not in NXT, Dominic Mysterio was thrown right to the wolves on the main roster. But when you look at how much that dude has improved year over year to the point where he's one of the biggest superstars on the roster now, it speaks volumes. And you could say, well, he's one of the biggest superstars on the roster now because of the character work, which is true, but the character work has improved year over year over year. But realistically, when he was the NXT North American champion, he was putting on banger matches as well. Kiana James is one of those people who has improved dramatically over the course of premium live events to the point where when you would see her in the last Iron Survivor Challenge at Deadline, she was a total highlight. And I think that when you look at who's improving, you've got to look at Lash Legend. Lash Legend is one of those people that I think a lot of people watching NXT kind of wrote off early because she was so new to this. And that is, that it's a double-edged sword putting someone on TV immediately, because while, yeah, they get into the accelerated lane and they get immediate exposure, a lot of times people cast judgment early. But if you don't judge Lash Legend by what she's doing then, and instead do it by what she's doing now, or take what she's doing then and put it in the context of what she's doing now, her improvement has been insane. Like, she's got this charisma about her, this star power that is so clearly there. She's a professional athlete even before she got to the WWE. So that's there. And when you watch how much Lash has improved and how much more natural she is, and how much she's another one that I think eventually you're going to get to a point where you're like, oh, the sky's the limit here for Lash Legend. And I feel the same way about Kiana James. So there was her, and then there was also Carmelo Hayes, of course. And Carmelo Hayes, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Carmelo, but I think the presentation for him was right on the money. The idea of Carmelo coming in and being presented as this top-tier star, right? This is not somebody who's coming in and going, well, I did a lot of work in NXT, but now it's time to prove myself again. Like, nope. Drafting him in the first round, I think, was a key move, because this is somebody who was NXT World Champion for a considerable amount of time. This is somebody who was showcased as a top talent in NXT. This is somebody who participated in the main event of the last NXT Premium Live event that was being advertised and promoted as potentially the biggest match in the history of NXT. If you're going to put that amount of work into a character in NXT, it has to translate onto the main roster. That's a problem that NXT had years ago. That you would put that amount of work into a character, and then they would get to the main roster, and none of it would count. And you know what that does long term? It makes it so that if the same people are watching Raw and SmackDown that watch NXT, when they watch NXT, they go, this is fun, but none of this counts anyway. So how seriously am I really taking this show? Yeah, this main event is a big main event, but it's not going to count towards the main roster. So how big can it really be? The fact that somebody can be that big in NXT and it translates so well that they end up being a first-round pick in the draft, that they end up challenging the WWE champion on his first night, and that they end up having a competitive match with the WWE championship on their first night, I think that is exactly how you want to showcase somebody that's been at the top of the food chain in NXT. At some point, and I think it'll be soon, Trick Williams will be on the main roster. When Trick Williams is brought onto the main roster, he should not be brought onto the main roster as a, lower mid-card talent. Trick Williams should be brought onto the main roster as somebody that is ready to run things. Braun Breaker cannot be brought onto the main roster as somebody who is like, okay, but he's never been in these deep waters. He should be plowing through people the way he's been plowing through people. I think that having that level of synergy between the main roster and NXT is something that has been missing, but is key to the success, not only in NXT, but key to the success in making sure that NXT builds a future roster of stars. Because when we see stars being formed in NXT, if we know that translates to the main roster based on history, we're going to watch NXT. And so I very much like the way Carmelo Hayes was positioned. Now, that's night one. Ultimately, what is the story that we've got with Carmelo Hayes? And I think that part of the reason why people haven't been getting called up to the main roster willy-nilly, like people were asking about Carmelo Hayes being called up a year ago. I mean, I feel like 2 years ago they were asking about Carmelo Hayes being called up. Braun Breaker. People have been ready. People thought when he lost at the Stand and Deliver 2 years ago to Dolph Ziggler, they were like, I guess he's getting called up. It took 2 years before he was called up. Why? I think because it's not just about, okay, he's the man in NXT, now let's put him on the main roster. It's about finding the right timing, making sure there's a story, making sure there's a direction for him to go in. And I don't know who that'll be, maybe because so not only do you need the right opponent, but it's got to be people that he can beat. Like, it's got to be people that matters that he can beat. To me, I feel like a Carmelo Hayes LA Knight story would be a good story to tell, with Carmelo Hayes being the villain. But do you really want LA Knight to be losing matches right now? Probably not. Luckily they've got the King of the Ring coming up after Backlash. So the King of the Ring is this ideal situation where it's a goal that people can have. They may never end up touching other certain people. Like LA Knight and Carmelo Hayes could both be looking for that King of the Ring crown. But depending on where they are in the brackets, they never have to touch each other. Or somebody Carmelo can cheat to win, advance in the tournament, and you can still tell the story later of LA Knight getting his revenge against Carmelo Hayes. Ultimately, there's no way to me that Gunther doesn't win the King of the Ring. Like, it's kind of a foregone conclusion. I'm waiting to see who else declares, but I feel like that will 100% happen. But who knows? Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe Giovanni Vinci will interfere or something like that. But I do think that will give you a little bit of a buffer so that maybe Carmelo Hayes can go towards the King of the Ring, and coming off of the King of the Ring, whatever that next story is, But when you got AJ Styles, it's technically a heel, but you could, whatever. LA Knight, Kevin Owens, Randy Orton, Carmelo Hayes versus Kevin Owens could be fun. Eventually, could be cool if you put Carmelo Hayes, if he's going to be a villain, you put him in a similar position to where Randy Orton was when he was the Legend Killer, right? Carmelo isn't necessarily calling himself the Legend Killer, but it's clearly hearkening back to Legend Killer days. And you have Carmelo Hayes as a young Randy Orton type hunting down this more sort of senior Randy Orton. That could be interesting. And maybe Randy Orton gets a loss, then he gets a win, and I think you can do it in a way that both could come out bigger regardless of who wins and who loses, as long as Randy Orton doesn't just come and steamroll Carmelo Hayes. That would be a bad thing. But we'll see. We'll see. Last week, we didn't get to talk about Dynasty, which was a shame because it was a great pay-per-view. AEW puts on great pay-per-views. It's what AEW does. Multiple match of the year candidates. Of course, the one that I think everybody's talking about is that Will Ospreay, Bryan Danielson match, which our judges gave 12 and 5/8 stars. So that's a big headline coming out of Notsam Wrestling. Look, incredible match. Certainly going to be in the conversation for match of the year. Certainly one of the best AEW matches ever. I mean, wrestling is 31 flavors right now. You could within the month of April, you've got two all-time great matches that look completely different. At the end of 2024, Roman Reigns versus Cody Rhodes from WrestleMania 40 and Bryan Danielson versus Will Ospreay from Dynasty are going to be two, if not the two of the matches that people are talking about when they create match of the year. And it will probably make, way more arguments and way more tribalism because it's two distinct ways of thinking and two distinct ways of telling stories. But to me, both of those matches are incredible matches. Both of those matches are 5-star matches. Both of those matches are the type of matches that you should be able to have that conversation of being match of the year, match of the last 5 years, match of whatever. Because it's hard to imagine. I mean, the same way that, all the stuff like Kenny Omega and Okada's series of matches are some of the greatest matches of all time. So is Hulk Hogan versus The Rock. So is Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3. Hogan versus Andre is one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. Omega versus Okada is one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time. It really is. It's not even what flavor of ice cream do you want. It's what flavor of ice cream do you want right now. That's the beauty of it. I can wake up in the morning and choose any flavor of ice cream I want. It's all there right in front of me. And that's how I think that this era of wrestling should be celebrated, that we can get it all. And I love the idea of having these two promotions. And if I'm AEW, I go, okay, like, we know this is what we do. Let's lean into this. This is the ice cream that we serve. And we'll also have stories over here, but we're going to be known for that flavor of ice cream. And WWE's over here going, yeah, we're going to have 5, 10, 15-star matches, but we're also going to tell great stories. And the stories, that's going to be our specialty flavor of ice cream, or however you want to categorize it. You can categorize it however you want. But as a wrestling fan, if your plate's not full right now, then you don't know how a buffet works, because this is all you can eat. And it is the greatest time to be a fan. So just think about that show, right? You had that Bryan Danielson Will Ospreay match. You had the FTR Bucks match, which was a great match, but also the return of Jack Perry, who, by the way, I do think that they did a good job of making Jack Perry's return a bigger and bigger deal. Like, you see that the reason that CM Punk footage, because that's what we were all asking, why would you air the CM Punk footage? The reason is to make Jack Perry a bigger deal when Jack Perry came back. Now, could you have gotten there without airing the CM Punk footage? I think you could have. I think you could have just had the Young Bucks cut a promo where they were like, Jack Perry hasn't been welcome back here. They could have just mentioned it and had the exact same effect, but whatever. Either way, Jack Perry comes back and it's a big deal. And then you have your moment. Swerve winning the AEW World Championship. Not only do you have your first black world champion in AEW, but you make a star and you make your fan base happy. I thought it was great. And then you have your angle on Dynamite. Everybody's asking, why don't you do more stories? Why don't you do more angles? Well, how about this one? The main event of Dynamite, for the first time in a long time, is not a match. It's a talking segment. And Jack Perry is back. Jungle Boy returns. And he brings Tony Khan out. And he gives him a hug. And then for the first time on AEW television, Tony Khan takes bumps. Tony Khan gets hit in the stomach with a microphone, which was a shot that I'd never seen before. But then, boom, takes a Tony Khan / Meltzer driver in the middle of the ring. And he's out. And I'll tell you, this was, at its core, successful for a couple of reasons. Number one, it got people talking. We're talking about it. Number two, it has people saying what's coming next. And number three, Tony Khan showing up to the NFL draft with a neck brace on and having everybody talk about the fact that this happened on his television show is just great news for his television show. WWE, a lot of questions have been coming up. First, we got a couple more releases. We found out that Von Wagner was released. I think he might have been released at the same time as the guys that we talked about last week. But we also found out this week that Cameron Grimes, a.k.a. Trevor Lee, was released. And I feel like, not that any of the others won't, but Cameron Grimes and Jinder Mahal, I think, are the two guys. And Jinder put out an Instagram video this week. But I think that those are the two guys that are going to be able to hit the ground running and go hard. Like, the run that Jinder is going to get to go on is going to be immense. He should be showing up everywhere. Every independent promotion, Impact, New Japan, everywhere. And Cameron Grimes, the same thing. Like, those are two guys that it's like, okay, now you're on your own. Show the world what you're capable of. A spotlight was put on you, and I think once those guys are free to go on, and they're now, like, they're elevated to a point where they're going to be able to go on these shows, be in high-profile matches, and get the world talking. And I think it's going to be a really good thing for both of them. I also think it's very interesting the way WWE is handling re-signing talent. You know, that historically, that's been something that's kind of talked about, you know, in the dirt sheets and stuff like that, but not really publicized when a talent re-signs or when their deal's up or stuff like that, which is interesting because in the sports world, when like all that contract stuff, I think is far more public than it is in the wrestling world. And it feels like they might be taking the lead from there. Because we saw 2 public re-signings to the WWE this week. Finn Balor announced on his Instagram account that he loved his time in the WWE, and that's why, ellipses, he's not going anywhere. So Finn Balor announces he's re-signed. And then we got a video from Drew McIntyre, who was at a dinner and was presented by the waiter with a sword, apparently a gift from a member of the board of directors of TKO, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a gift to celebrate Drew McIntyre signing a new deal, re-signing, and remaining with the WWE. So just I think that it's a good thing. I think that if we're all going to find out when people get released, we should probably also find out when people re-sign. And I also think that it's good because when you make a big deal about superstars re-signing with the company, it makes the superstars feel like a bigger deal. It's like, oh, look who we got. You know what I mean? Like Finn Balor, Drew McIntyre, they could have gone anywhere in the world, but they're here with us. They've decided to stay with the WWE. That's a big deal. So I think that it's a good thing. Speaking of good things, Backlash is going to be this Saturday from France, 1 p.m. Eastern start time. We got 5 matches announced. I would imagine we'll get another match. Well, we might not. We might get one more match, maybe 2 more matches. We don't have a women's singles match. We have a triple threat and a tag title. So we could have Becky defending the women's championship, but we don't really have to, right? The tag team championship is going to get defended on SmackDown on Friday, the WWE Tag Team Championship. You could have the World Championship get defended, right, with Miz and Truth. Or you could just do these 5 matches. You know, the way WWE's been doing pay-per-views, it wouldn't surprise me if they just went for 5. But this is what we've got. 4 title matches and then 1 big tag team match. The big tag team match is Randy Orton and Kevin Owens versus the Bloodline. I would imagine that we will see some chicanery. I would imagine we'll get some Bloodline chicanery that will lead this feud to continue even further. You've got the Kabuki Warriors defending the Tag Team Championship against Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill. I would not be surprised at all to see Bianca and Jade win the Tag Team Championship. I mean, 2 things could happen, right? You could have either Bianca or Jade turn on one another. That's possible. But I don't think it's time for that yet. I think that it would probably be good for all parties to have Bianca and Jade win. Eventually, we'll get to the match. But I think Backlash in France would be a good time to switch that title. Bayley versus Naomi versus Tiffany Stratton. I think that this is a good way to put Tiffany Stratton in a championship match without having her be forced to lose or win the title. I don't think it's time for Bayley to lose the title. I don't necessarily want to see Tiffany Stratton lose. So I think we'll probably see Bayley get the pinfall over Naomi to retain the title. Damian, I don't think any other titles will change, right? Damian Priest versus Jey Uso. I don't see Jey Uso winning the World Heavyweight Championship. Could be some Judgment Day interference. Could be some Finn Balor action. Who knows? Could even be some Bloodline interference, right? They're not separated by the rosters, so I could see some Bloodline interference popping up there. But yeah, Damian Priest winning, and then I think Cody Rhodes versus AJ Styles would just be a classic, great Cody AJ match with Cody coming out on top. I'm excited to see it. I'm also excited to see what you have to say. Let's get to these emails. NotSamWrestling@gmail.com is our email address. NotSamWrestling@gmail.com. Let's go to Dom from WrestlePub. Dom says, first, I want to say a quick thank you for inspiring me to start my own wrestling YouTube channel. I think you and Busted Open are the best platforms for discussing the world of professional wrestling, and I think I speak for many of your followers that we all care deeply about your perspectives on the product and the industry as a whole. As far as I can tell, you have the most important opinion of wrestling coming from a non-performer that the industry has ever had. Man, oh man, that's quite a compliment. And it's probably one that I can accept because most of the other people with very important opinions are performers. So I like that caveat. My question: Do you think we'll get a women's mid-card title for Raw and SmackDown? NXT recently announced the women's North American title, and I'm curious if you think this is the first of many mid-card women's championships. Do you think this is stepping into the too many belts territory? I think WWE should introduce women's mid-card titles for the main roster. Doing so will add more depth to storylines, whether it's by introducing new rivalries or supplementing a talent's character arc centered around the pursuit of the championship. It also creates a balanced hierarchy that the men's division has, which helps the viewer better understand the who's who in the division. You know, I've long been against adding women's championships and more for adding women's stories. That said, especially with the amount of women coming up from NXT, for the first time in the history of this podcast, almost 500 weeks, I wouldn't mind a mid-card title being added to the women's division, a women's intercontinental championship. And I would call it the women's intercontinental championship because it would carry a certain amount of weight. You know, the intercontinental championship is a big title in the WWE, and a historic title in the WWE. So I wouldn't mind a women's intercontinental championship being added, but I kind of feel like it should float between the two rosters. Two women's mid-card, a women's mid-card title, like a women's United States championship being added. So then there was 3 more singles titles in NXT, SmackDown, and Raw. That feels like a lot. I kind of feel like we would be better served if the women's intercontinental championship floated between brands, which can get messy, but it is what it is. And then if it's a success, you can add a women's United States championship like a year from now. But I think start with one is probably what I would say, in my opinion. Let's see. The captain writes in, so Becky won the Women's World Championship Battle Royal, and it seems a good chunk of the WWE Universe is upset. But she was honestly the best choice because we know when Rhea comes back, she's going to be a big, dominant force, face or heel, likely face, and whoever stands in her way will just be seen as the one who wasn't able to beat her. Anyone less established runs the risk of being buried during her return if she's going to be as dominant as she proved during her reign. Well, I don't think so. I mean, I just feel like it's somebody else for Liv to chase. I think Liv's going to beat Becky Lynch at some point. I think Liv's going to win the title from Becky Lynch. You know, I don't, like, it's not just a foregone conclusion that, well, Becky won the Battle Royal, so she's just going to be champion until Rhea Ripley returns. Like, I think Liv's going to beat Becky Lynch at some point. Also, if Becky does what she did during her NXT title reign, basically holding an open challenge, she can keep the prestige of the title up while giving opportunities to other women on the roster. I don't love that, to tell you the truth, who either wouldn't have an opportunity anytime soon with Rhea only defending every month and a half. Women like Zoe Stark, Ivy Nile, Maxine Dupree, Candice LeRae, Katana Chance, and others, if they're going to make a new women's mid-card title, like look at this, another one. Like I've seen many speculate for Queen of the Ring tournament, it can showcase the best contenders for that title. Yeah, no, I don't think that, like, Rhea just did that in NXT. So I don't think Rhea being like, I'm going to be a defending champion and defend my title every week and have Rhea beat somebody on the roster every single week. You know, that's not what I would do. I would tell a story with Becky Lynch. I think there's a story to be told between Becky Lynch and Liv Morgan. So go right into it. The story that you were going to tell between Liv Morgan and Rhea Ripley, do a version of that with Liv Morgan and Becky Lynch. And, you know, eventually have Liv Morgan win. Let's go to Nicholas. First, a little hello. I don't know what that says. Are you ready, Sam? 1 week from now, the French fans unite as one will show the world why WWE was right to give us a PLE. We're going to be as loud as it can be. Do you know what a butch clap is? I believe it's when Pete Dunne gets cheered. You will. Have a nice week. All right, Nicholas. I'm glad you're excited. Steven writes in. Hope all is well. I know it might be a little early, but who do you have winning King of the Ring and Queen of the Ring? Gunther? And you know what? I wouldn't be mad if Candice LeRae won Queen of the Ring. I have Gunther for King and Chelsea for Queen. I'm fine with Chelsea for Queen. She'd be obnoxious and everything, but I don't know. I feel like it would be a boost for Candice, and I've been enjoying her as a villain lately. How do you like the idea of Jade being queen? I don't mind it. It feels very similar to Gunther being king in the sense that you just have these two dominant forces being king and queen. I also think that Jade, if I've got her winning the tag team championship with Bianca Belair, I just don't have her as doing that yet. Is it too early in her WWE career for something like this? Not necessarily too early. I just think that she'd be better off as a tag team champion. Also, it was really cool hearing you tell us about the moment you had with your son after Mania weekend. My son is 2. I can't wait to watch with him all the time. Well, let him find it on its own. Let him find it on his own. Let him become a fan organically. My son organically became a fan, and it's much, much better that way. Oliver writes in, I doubt you remember, but I wrote in a few weeks back asking for some advice on my Hulkamania research paper. Not only did I use you as a quoted source, but I got a 97%. I think at least 5 of that percent is mine. No doubt, thanks to you and your words of wisdom. Also, I had a wrestling question. Solo Sikoa made a point emphasizing how losing matters and how in this new bloodline, wins and losses continue to matter. I love that as far as the storyline goes, but it's pretty common knowledge that Solo has lost like 30-plus straight live events. What do you make of this, and how should its impact on the screen, should it impact the on-screen story? Well, I think that there's a lot of internet memes that Solo has lost at live events. But the idea that there's a win-loss record at live events is not really part of what is ever talked about on TV. It has never been mentioned on television. Solo lost this live event match. Solo lost that live event match. Solo was mad that Jimmy Uso lost to Jay at WrestleMania. The idea that Solo has lost to LA Knight 30 times at live events, that's called a live event loop. Like, what are we doing? What are we talking about here? If Solo had lost, you could say, well, Solo lost on the way to WrestleMania on television. Yes. But, this whole thing of, well, Solo loses at live events. Okay, all right. I mean, I know everything counts, and I know we watch the product. But do we really have to go to Cage Match and find out the results of every live event in order to follow the storyline? That feels like a little much. If somebody goes, well, hey, you didn't exactly beat Cody Rhodes. Hey, you didn't beat this person on Raw or SmackDown. That, I think, is fair game. But a live event that wasn't even on, if a Twitter clip gets out and it goes viral, counts. But if it's just a meme that is like, oh, look, all these live events he lost to LA Knight. Like, okay, cool. Let's see. Oh, okay, that's something else. Avik, my man Avik writes in, seeing as the winner gets a title shot for King of the Ring, is Drew a give-in to win and face Damian in Glasgow? Or would it be Finn to add to the Judgment Day drama? I feel like it's going to be Gunther. I don't know how you have Gunther lose the King of the Ring tournament. And have they said the winner gets a title shot? Maybe they have, and I missed it. I don't know. But I don't know if they've specifically said that or if it's just you're going based on history. I feel like if the winner gets a title shot and Drew McIntyre enters the King of the Ring tournament in order to get the title shot, why wouldn't CM Punk just stop him from winning the same way he stopped him from... The same way he cost him the match, the cash-in at WrestleMania, and he stopped him from winning the number 1 contenders match. So why wouldn't he just stop him from winning the King of the Ring? Yeah, I think Gunther's your guy. Brett writes in, Brett from Cincinnati, the highest mark of your success, and it's so awesome, is that a WWE program on Peacock is going to be taped in your basement. Amazing, man. It was taped. SmackDown Lowdown's on Peacock. Watch it. On the draft episode of the pod, you said that you'd keep the Bloodline on SmackDown, but also said Raw needs star power heading into the Netflix deal. Doesn't one help the other? No, both of those things can be true. The Bloodlines, there's a lot of stars. And by the way, he's talking about a Patreon episode I did, but the Bloodline are not the only star. First of all, the Bloodline right now is just Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga on television. So, to say that you need to have stars on Netflix is not to say that you don't need to have stars on SmackDown on USA. So, no, I stand by. I drafted him on the bump. Put him on SmackDown. Dominic Mysterio's on Raw. What else do you need? I think the Bloodline being drafted to Raw adds star power ahead of the Netflix transition because the Bloodline also means The Rock right around Netflix time. The Rock was on Raw anyway. Like, I don't think we have to worry about that. And B, keeps Cody and the Bloodline separate, which is needed in my opinion. I mean, there's something to that, but yeah, I mean, I think that there's plenty of star power outside of the Bloodline. And if anything, you want to build, you don't want the Bloodline to be your kind of end-all, be-all of star power in WWE. Let's see. Jack writes in, I just started listening to your podcast recently. I've seen you on WWE TV, but really found out about you and your podcast through Busted Open. Oh, shout out to Busted Open. I was listening to the episode about Solo and his MFT, and I think I have an idea of what MFT could mean. I Googled it, and the first thing that came up was marriage and family therapist. Could Tama Tonga be the Bloodline family therapist? And by therapy, of course, I mean using fists. Yes, I think we will find out that Tama Tonga is a licensed marriage and family therapist. Keisha writes in, do you think Cody Rhodes will take Roman's place as the head of the table and become the tribal chief and take over the Bloodline? Yes, I do. No, of course I do not. It's ridiculous. Ahmed writes in, from Riyadh. What's up, Ahmed? I'm here to share some feelings. John Cena hitting the AA on Roman Reigns in the main event made me lose sleep for weeks. Jey Uso, Taker, and Seth did not attack Roman Reigns, and neither were intending to. That would have been the perfect explanation for Bloodline rules, where Solo and Jimmy could attack Cody because it was their rules. The babyfaces were only there to protect Cody from everyone else, but can't attack Roman. But unfortunately, Cena hit that AA while the ref was in the ring. Now I can't stop thinking about it, and I've been trying to justify it, but can't. Do your magic and justify this like you did with The Undertaker being there instead of Austin. Well, Ahmed, thank you. And thank you for the credit for the justification of The Undertaker. Look, I think the Bloodline, the justification is that the Bloodline made a mistake. You know from listening to this show that I said Bloodline rules should be that the Bloodline can do whatever they want and Cody can't. The Bloodline said that it's Bloodline rules, which means anything goes. They made two mistakes. Number one, they said anything goes. Number two, Roman Reigns got distracted by Seth Rollins. And that's all it was. You know? I mean, technically, Seth Rollins tried to put his hands on Roman Reigns, or would have put his hands on Roman Reigns if he had been able to, but couldn't. Let's go to John. John, Sam, loved the show. Curious on your thoughts on all the recent heel turns. Who will be a long-lasting heel, and who will their feuds be with? Could it lead to a title reign? Candice LeRae. I see this as a huge long-term opportunity for her. I do too, Jonathan. I'm glad you wrote that because, as you know, I think it could lead to King of the Ring. Chad Gable. I don't mind his turn, his bullying of Alpha Academy on Raw. I'm just not sure what to think yet. If we end up getting Wrestling Machine era Chad Gable from this heel turn, I think it'll be a great thing. It worked for Kurt. Ciampa, although not sure this is a big turn just yet. I'm not sure either, but if it leads to the Johnny Ciampa rivalry spilling over onto the main roster, I'm all for it. And Liv Morgan, is she a heel or not? I can't tell. Go back to the beginning of the pod. I suppose I'll just let it cook. Ultimately, John, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to watch the product. You need to speculate wildly, so I have no problem with this email. You got to let them cook. You have to let them cook because everything counts. That's the third rule. Jeremy writes in, love listening more and more, but you are missing out on Uncle Howdy. The Dreadmare YouTube channel has been up for 2 months. Let us in. Yeah, the Dreadmare YouTube channel is a fan channel. I'm not doing fan fiction podcast. I don't mind the Dreadmare channel. I think it's a well-done channel, but I don't think it has anything to do with what's going on in WWE. So, you know, I'm following the clues. I'm scanning my QR codes. But I think the Dreadmare channel is completely unrelated. If anything, it feels like the Dreadmare channel is like trying to play catch up with all the clues that WWE are dropping. All right, last email. Taryn writes in, I have a small story and a follow-up question for you. I was at the third ever episode of Dynamite, which took place in Philadelphia. On the show was a tag match where the first time Omega and Hangman teamed up to take on Moxley and Pac. And in the match, Pac tries to cheat every chance he gets to a point where Mox is like, dude, I get it, whatever it takes to win, but this is just too much. Mox eventually flips off Pac, followed by Death Rider, and leaves in Moxley fashion, leaving Omega and Hangman to pick the win by pinning Pac. Okay. So my question is, 3 out of the 4 men in that match are now or have been AEW World Champions. And I do think, despite the injuries, Pac has the qualifications to be a credible champion. I really dug what he did as King Neville, and since became a fan of Pac. What do you think of Pac overall, and do you think he will ever be a world champion? Thank you for being Not Sam, even though you are literally named Sam. Well, I think it's a great question. I think Pac is one of the best wrestlers on the planet. It's hard to deny that. I think that whether it's because of injuries or just because of the way he's being used, I have no idea. I think that we need a consistency with him. You know what I mean? Like, we need to see him, and it's not a consistency of great matches, because all he has are great matches. He had a great match at the pay-per-view with Okada. But I do think that he just needs to be put in a position where he's telling a compelling story over the course of week to week to week to week. Because I think eventually, Pac versus Swerve could be an incredible title feud. Are you kidding me? Pac versus Swerve, and Pac being that bastard who wants to take this all away from Swerve. If eventually Pac is the one who takes the title off of Swerve, could be an amazing story. So yeah, no, I think that I think you're on the money, my friend. I think you are on the money. I appreciate all of you guys hanging out today. Once again, for Not Sam Wrestling, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Keep up on everything that we're doing. Oh, I put out a special show on the audio feed as well as on the YouTube channel. Chapter 1 of The Rock as the final boss. I would recommend you check that out. I love the way that show came out. Watch that. Watch The Bump. Watch SmackDown Lowdown from Saturday. It's on Peacock. And we'll see you again very soon here on Not Sam Wrestling.